Welcome back to the Adventure Athletes podcast, guys. In this episode, I sit down with Callum Stronach. He's actually my old nutritionist from when I was an Olympic lifter. He's worked with some incredible athletes and just a vast variety of people from all walks of life, helping them deal with food and their emotional connection with food. Personally, he's run ultras, he's a weightlifter, he's an ex-rugby player, and he's a massive advocate of men's mental health and has a variety of projects based around that. So definitely check him out. He's doing so much. In this episode, we talk about how your mental health affects your diet, the effects of trauma on both your life and on your diet, bringing it back to nutrition, and dealing with the perception of others. This is a great episode, and as you can tell, it's not recorded here in the studio. It was recorded in his office. He was kind enough to host me recording the podcast for the day. Now, with Adventure Athletes, we've got some really big goals. I've set up a new Instagram account, so you don't have to hear me talking about our services on this podcast. It's all going to be posted on there. So if you're interested in getting into fitness, doing outdoor activity days or sports massage, head over to our website, adventureathletes.co.uk, and also check out our Instagram, the Adventure Athletes Training. But for the podcast, my goal is I want 1,000 plays on a single episode this year. My personal challenge is I'm going to do an Everest rope climb, so climbing up and down a 5-meter rope until I've matched the height of Everest, and this is going to link in with my next goal, which is fundraising £10,000 for BigMoose. BigMoose is a charity in Cardiff. They're doing amazing things, providing free therapy for those that are struggling. I've personally been through therapy through BigMoose, and it's been a massive help, so any help I can give them in return, I will. So definitely check them out, and for now, enjoy the podcast.
How are you?
I like, yeah, it's a good question.
I thought it was very appropriate for you.
Yeah. So easy to answer that flippantly. And I think we're just going to go there. I think one of the things that I suppose I really try and promote with my work, but then also, like, I suppose I could use that as a deflection and say more personally, is that just that idea of multiplicity of like truths and different experiences and things like that. And so if we talk about like that question, like how are you, is the truth of that answer is that I'm good, but like in a way that embodies hope. I feel hopeful. It's the new year. And I do feel like a sense of kind of the expectation that kind of comes with that. But there's also like a lot of uncertainty, frustration. I'd say that I'm frustrated coming into the new year. And one of the things that I've really tried to do is almost like arrive in the new year, almost like bringing all my baggage and allowing it to be here, like all the uncertainty. We were speaking beforehand about how all the kind of like the different projects and like professionally like challenges, maybe some more personal challenges and stuff like that I'm just arriving here with the baggage, like all the fucking suitcases under my arms, and really just allowing that and kind of not trying to just be like, okay, that was in 2023, where it's like, no, like this is the gateway to, so much of my own kind of like expansion, I guess. So in answer to your question, which I don't want to answer flippantly, I would say that in this moment, I'm grateful you're here. I'm excited to chat. I am, dealing with, I feel uncertain, frustrated, but also really, really content. Like there's a contentment and a peace that like I also feel too.
Yeah, no, that was a good answer. Like you said, it's so easy to just take it as like a passing comment, like, how are you? Oh yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
and you just sort of shy away from the actual question. So
Yeah, one of the things that I think it must have been a few years ago now, but one of the things that I really spoke about or kind of tried to embody for myself was just not lie. Just don't lie. And obviously there's a time and a place. And if I'm working with clients and they go, oh yeah, how are you doing? That's not a time for me to just be like, oh, I'm crap. And, I'm in a pit of my own kind of humanity, I guess. But at the same time, just like bring the truth of my experience to a situation. And if it was a case where I was really in that sense of like in a more professional example, and I was in that state of I don't know, a bit more of helplessness or experiencing some of the more, I suppose, what we call like the darker side of our emotions, I would just make a point to just sneakily like bypass the question. Or even if it would just say, yeah, it's been a really challenging day today. And that's what's really true for me. And so, yeah, not lying, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do in terms of like honouring our experiences and not having like, I can just show up here. Like, however, I give myself permission to just show up here however I want to. Yeah. And I think like particularly parts of my own struggle, if we want to call it, in the past of being like, no, I like, right, this is a podcast and I have to be whatever, like this performative thing. And then that obviously plays into kind of ideas about my identity and things like that. But yeah, just to give myself permission to be like, no, like I don't have to be anything but Callum here in the truth of his own experience.
Yeah, definitely. It's so easy to, and this is what like I found with myself, you just get carried away in a character, especially when you're playing like this big role on social media. It's just like you're playing this character, and then the boundaries of your character and your true self become very blurred.
100%. It's easy to fall into that kind of construct through the ideas of almost like we're being, and it's not to say being who we want to be, and it's not to say that those things aren't us, but then it's that ideas of the danger then becomes where we repress the other parts of ourselves, which and the other parts of ourselves are essentially our humanity. And then I think particularly as men, like we create this like, I call it like the beach ball effect, where like right now I'm here and I'm performing and I'm trying to be of value in whatever way, but at the same time it's like holding a beach ball under the water hoping that it doesn't pop up. And then we see the side effects of what happens when it does like pop up, which it inevitably does. And for me, that was like huge avoidant behaviors where I just literally go MIA for, sometimes it'd just be a day and people would notice. But that day was just like complete recluse. And it might extend over a kind of a more significant period of time, 2 or 3 days, where again, like for me, like I could be that swan kind of kicking hard underneath, but on the surface there. But then the impact of that beach ball kind of exploding in other men might be, and other people of other genders too, like I don't want to say that, might be like huge outbursts of anger and rage and everything, and huge other methods of kind of escapism in that respect. And so yeah, part of it is like, it's not to say that when I'm in that kind of more performative, like charismatic, that's not me, it is me. But it's also me when like I have these other parts that kind of just are a bit more tender and a bit more vulnerable, essentially.
Yeah. I think like this is already taking me back to thinking about why I picked you as my nutritionist in the first place. Because this is obviously how I know you, is you were my nutritionist.
Yeah.
Not for a huge amount of time, but it was definitely a helpful period for me. And I remember when I was looking for a nutritionist, I was weightlifting at Willpower, and I was looking at the other nutritionists that other people were signed up to. You obviously had Origin Project.
Yeah.
Amazing,
Yeah,
amazing nutritionist. Been trying to get him on the podcast. So Sean, if you're listening, please come on. And then, like, you were the other standout one for me, because Sean is very much like science. These are the numbers. This is how you're going to lose weight. This is how we're going to do it sensibly and make sure you're performing at your best. And I'm interested in that because I love the science. I love the numbers, but it wasn't what I needed. And then I saw you were working with Mikey, and like I looked into you a bit more, and I was like, this is more about your relationship with food and having like that healthier appreciation for nutrition, and that is definitely more what I needed at the time. So do you want to walk us through how you got into nutrition and how you've come across sort of that quite unique path into nutrition as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and this is the beauty of it's the beauty and I suppose some of the downsides of the fitness industry, in the sense that we can take something like nutrition as an example, and put our own look at it through literally our own lens. And that's why I love people like Sean, because obviously everything he says is completely 100% evidence-based, and I say too, but I just say it in a completely different language and probably like target a slightly different avatar of client within that. Obviously there are some people who are spouting some like factually wrong information, where it becomes a bit guarded, where it becomes a bit more complex. But then you've got someone like Sean who is very clinical and gets amazing results, and we're just interpreting the same pieces of information around kind of different consumption of like the managing of energy expenditure, particularly when you and I were working together, management of energy expenditure, our macronutrient intake, and we just create it in a package that is hopefully digestible to the people we're working with. Now, the difference that I have is that, like, I come from a lens of, I suppose, sport, professional sport, but then within that there is obviously understanding that our relationship with food is an inherently complex one. And so that, not to like that clinical approach to nutrition is so important. It's so important, but also understanding that there is also, and I'm not saying that the clinical approach to nutrition doesn't account for the kind of the more human side within our attachment to food and our utilization of food. But it is understanding that there are people out there who will, by their very nature, will have a complex relationship with food. And so it should be. Food is something that triggers every sensory system within the body at pretty much the same time. And so it's hugely powerful entity that can create such a strong feeling, like within us. Like you and I could create a more unified experience through going for food. Like I got a coffee before we started this podcast, so it just felt a bit more like at ease. Like it's powerful in that respect. And so my approach to then come to seeing food as this kind of both physical entity but also emotional entity comes from a sense of being a kind of a high level athlete and playing professional sport when I was younger, but then also struggling myself. So the way in which, when people are like, well, how you got to where you are today, is that I've almost been on a pursuit to solve my own shit. And so as like a young teenager, I was a good rugby player, but quite overweight. And so therefore I was like, okay, well, I will start going to the gym. And I was very lucky to have a PE teacher who really encouraged that. Then it was like, okay, there's still something not quite right here. It was helping, but I didn't feel like in control or all the rest of it. And then it's like, okay, so I'll go to uni and get a sports science degree. And then that helped again. And actually, through that time I was playing, that was the height of my kind of, I suppose, professional sport career. Went to play rugby, played for professionally down south, and then went to play in Canada and loaned out over there and stuff like that. So it was like, that was good, but I never felt like, oh, I got this now, even though I had this kind of knowledge. And then I stopped playing rugby and then really kind of fell into what I call the kind of ideas of an eating disorder, like a clinically diagnosed one. And that kind of brought me onto the path. But again, there was huge challenges around that time, but my answer was to, again, try and seek more control, like inside a nutrition masters. And then off the back of that, like I still didn't have to do it. And then it was a kind of a combination of then starting starting therapy with a more serious intent, and then doing a kind of going down the psychology route. Being that sense of kind of establishing my own kind of view on food. But the thing is that I was seeing that my journey was helping other people, and not that I was outward with my struggles, like that was very much behind doors, but working within a professional elite organization and having athletes who were dealing with like clinical performance nutritionists, and then I was embodying the performance guidelines around the nutrition within set by the NGB, but then I was delivering it in a way which for some athletes was really appealing, like that kind of more humanistic side, to be like, okay, well, we're just going to rein things in a bit, and was kind of embodied a kind of, I don't want to say the clinical side is, particularly within elite sport, doesn't have compassion, because there are some great practitioners, but there are also some that maybe just have that kind of just do it mentality, particularly what we're talking now, 7-8 years ago. And so it was, I was kind of playing into that idea of understanding that our relationship with food is the platform in which we build that. And so although it would be great to have this kind of very performance lens to our nutrition, if the foundation of our relationship is not in place, then it's futile ground that we're building anything on. So in answer to your question, I am essentially in this place now because of a kind of a desire to solve my own shit, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah. So how does your approach sort of deal with the human side then? Like, how does that look for a client, let's say?
So one of the things that we look at is introduced to a client is this concept of safety, this emotional safety. And we all have a need for, it's a need. It's universal for safety, for certainty, etc., etc. And this is just like a perception of control. And we will always find a way to meet that need, regardless of, sometimes we meet it in really resourceful ways, but sometimes we meet it in unresourceful ways. And so what people can do is this idea of use things that are outside of themselves to generate that sense of safety and certainty, which is not a bad thing. But if if we don't have that ability to generate that sense of certainty from internal drivers, or be okay with uncertainty, then we're getting ourselves into problems where we might lean into things outside of ourselves that, in a way that is deemed fairly, problematic in that sense. And that could be anything from leaning into problematic behaviours around not just food, exercise, etc., but also just kind of getting too hung up on certain ideas about what we have to do, or at a deep level who we have to be. Like, if I am this person, then I am safe. And a very easy example that we kind of give is this idea of, let's use an example of kind of binge eating, or even just like overeating. If you've got someone who is an athlete who has this kind of attachment to things like MyFitnessPal, again, nothing against it, but it is something that says is an external driver of safety. If I have stuck to my plan, I feel safe, as opposed to being more in tune with our intuitive signals. And so if there is a day where either you can't, for a variety of reasons, maybe you're eating out or anything like that, or simply you don't want to, then one of the ways in which we can obtain a sense of safety, that's your blanket of safety. Like, I feel safe when. But then if that's removed, then we need to find a sense of safety. And so one option, there are a myriad of options, and some people cope really well with that, but one option would just be to say, fuck it. Because how can I be unsafe if all of a sudden there's no boundaries when it comes to food? And remembering that uncertainty is again this kind of idea of a threat. Like, it stems from that almost Paleolithic kind of idea of a man walking through a forest, and he might hear a rustle in the bushes. He needs the story that it could be the wind. But he also needs a story that it might be a saber-toothed tiger. So we have all of the, like, even stories. Like, if you hadn't shown up today to do this podcast, I would be unable to just objectively accept Will hasn't shown up today. There would have been some idea of uncertainty, and therefore, to decrease my vulnerability, I create a story. Now, if my self-esteem is in a lower place, I go, oh, Will doesn't value me, he's an asshole, he doesn't value my time. Or maybe, like, the story is, Will just forgot. Like, it's okay. Or maybe the story is, I don't need to know, but it's still a story. Like, you could have had an accident, you could have, like, I don't know, it's just it's completely uncertain. And so in terms of the way in which that then applies to food, is I think about it in the sense of how we use both our behaviours around food, our practices around food, our beliefs around food, our beliefs around exercise, and our sport and our movement, etc., to generate a sense of safety. And there's nothing wrong with having these things that are all outside of us as to these things, but if it's at a detriment of being in tune with our intuitive signals, our own emotions, our own signals around satiety and fullness and all of this kind of stuff, then that's the problem. And so at a practical level, what that looks like when working with clients is understanding how they use their behaviours or their beliefs around food, as well as their engagement in exercise and sport, and in some ways kind of like removing some of those things, so that they then have to generate that sense of certainty from internal drivers, and their own being, trusting in their own signalling and trusting in themselves, essentially.
Yeah. It sort of makes me reflect on me a lot. Because, I think one thing I came to you with was I do binge eat a lot. And I'll go through these periods where I'm, like you're saying, my fitness pal, I'm on track with everything. And then I'll just go through a period. And as soon as I've lost that control, lost that safety, like you're saying, I then just completely go off the rails. I'll binge eat for, could be weeks. And just lose all sense of control with it. And I find it really hard to claw it back. But then when I do claw it back, I take it to the other extreme. And it made me think of, I think this was after I had you as a nutritionist, where I stopped weightlifting, because I'd like moved away from willpower, I changed jobs, so then I couldn't get there when I used to train. And I'd signed up for the competition already that they were doing. And I'd signed up to be in the 81 kg category. And I was on track to hitting it, following the plan you gave me and everything. I kept that going for ages after I stopped working with you. And I'd tweak it every now and then to allow for variety and everything. I was doing really well. And then when I stopped training, I started binging, partly because I wasn't training and partly because work had changed my circumstances. So it became hard to cook and prep as much as I wanted to. And I put on like a decent amount of weight, which is unusual for me because I struggle to put on weight usually. And I went back up to I think I was around 88, 89 kilos. And then it sort of clicked for me when I had 10 days before the comp to lose that weight. And I went from just eating whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, to then restricting my calories to like, I was having less than 1,000 calories a day for 10 days to make weight, which was extremely unhealthy, but that was, I wanted to compete in the 81s. I didn't do a bad performance considering, but I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. To say I came to you after that and I was like, look, this is what I've just done. I've been through this period of binging. I've then restricted my calories massively. How would you deal with me as a client?
I would, if I'm honest, I would put in some foundational practices to kind of build a semblance of kind of safety and certainty. So there'd be an element of kind of structural things that I would do in terms of, and they're really really helpful things in terms of things that I would recommend that anyone who binge eats does, and that is, I don't want to say not tracking, because if someone is so reliant on tracking, then that is, can sometimes be counterintuitive, but a stepping away of tracking. So we're more reliant on our own intuitive signals and then creating a regular pattern of feeding, and a couple of other things. But the way in which I would explore it wouldn't necessarily be it wouldn't necessarily be through the lens of food. Understanding that food is just, the way we behave around food is the symptom. And so, and it almost sounds like counterintuitive to say, but we don't really have a problem with food. Food is the solution to our problem. And so if we're going through these kind of periods of binging, I would then look at more so what goes on with our emotional state. And there's many things that I would explore at a more personal level. But as a kind of an example, if you think about then food being the solution, what's it being the solution to? And usually it's to some form of unmet need. And then as well as that, it's looking at our more pre-programmed patterns within our nervous system. And so what we explore is this idea of like, what are our like subconscious reactions to the world, the outside world, this 3D world that we exist in. Because many of them we don't really aware of. Like, they are exactly that, they're subconscious. And so one of the things I kind of will, as to give kind of context and example with this, is to explore our relationships with certain states of emotions. Because usually someone who has a kind of a dysfunctional relationship with food has challenges that they around a more, I call it like a state of empowerment. So thinking about emotional states that make us feel like we are the captain of our ship. And if you, and many of us, are programmed because of our experiences to go into a state of disempowerment. And we get caught up in what we call this infinity loop. So it's this kind of figure of eight signal where we go from disempowerment to then empowerment. And we will always be on that dance. Like, that's okay, but it's then looking at the ways in which we kind of either hold ourselves at a state of empowerment, or we then transition into a state of kind of disempowerment. And there's nothing wrong with disempowerment, because part of that calls us to just go, trust. And that's part of it. It's the yin and yang, right? And so if you've got someone with, like I say, this dysfunctional state with empowerment, an example of that could be like people pleasing. That's a dysfunctional relationship with compassion. That's a very absolute statement, and I don't necessarily like it, absolute statements, but it is this idea of trying to stay empowered because I'm trying to control your perception of me, but then also within that, I struggle to show myself the same compassion that I might show to other people, particularly within this mode of people pleasing. So that is then a dysfunctional relationship with the idea of compassion. Emotions like anger. Anger is a derivative of love. I know we think of emotions like anger associated, I would call them either unhealthy anger or rage. Whereas if you look at the physiology attached to someone in a state of rage, it mimics more of a panic attack than it does of anything. Of anything healthy. We're not in control in that moment. Whereas anger in its healthiest expression says, I matter. And it is our ability to, it's the physiology is it's a deep breath, it's calm, it's strong, it's relaxed, it can be firm, it can be whatever it needs to be, but it's safe and I'm grounded. But if we were, as an example, like if we were shamed for that, if we were like, go to your room when you were a child, and we said, that version of you is not welcome here, then we learn to repress it. Or for someone like me, particularly as a larger child when I was younger, like seeing that I could potentially hurt people, I would play small. Like I would be like, oh no, I need to be nice. Even though I was this big unit of a kid. And so it's then thinking about like, okay, I could go on and on and on about the kind of the different emotions and how they might empower us, but then just looking at almost like the holes in our arsenal to be like, okay, what have we learned? And if you think about food as just another safety-seeking behaviour, it gives us that sense of certainty and safety, because if we're in an internal state of discomfort, then then it can be this sense of food helps, like just go, it's okay, and that's not always a bad thing. And so, but I would look at it through a lens of say, okay, what is it about our emotional state that that then is causing us to use food as an example. Like a really common one with women, I don't know, like with people, but I want to really speak to women with this, is most of them are just fucking angry. And what they have learned is that if you think about, they have this idea of a rise of energy within their emotion, their central nervous system, and they almost can have this pre-programmed response to then it to turn into sadness, because it's not safe to express. Maybe they don't want to be angry. They don't want to be the angry woman, because women are in this kind of society are told to be small and not take up too much space. But also they don't necessarily know how to hold it. Like, it's the same for men as well. I know they might be more outwardly and overtly aggressive and dominant, but many men are still like are controlling their body's performance just because they don't know how to harness that anger that exists within them. And so that's where I would start, is to just almost like look at, essentially, the way in which I describe it is not necessarily, this is a very reductionist way of describing it. It's thinking about like all of these emotions that we're designed to feel, and looking at, okay, what are the holes in your game? Like, you could have the most safest, most loving childhood and you'd still have holes in your game. And then actually it's likely those holes that are contributing to us then outsourcing our sense of safety through food, etc., etc. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Something I did want to take it onto, which is sort of stepping away from the emotional attachment to food and more onto the sport performance bit, is how important do you think food is to performance? Because like, I'm very conflicted. I love the science of sport. I love the science of nutrition. I've done like a fair bit of research. But I'm also into like ultra running, as I've seen you are, and some of the best ultra runners have got some of the worst diets you can imagine. My best example being like Courtney Dauwalter, just nachos and beer. Like, that's all she's fueled off, but she's like probably the top female ultra runner in the world. So like, how important is it? Is it just like another little 1% gain, or is it more than that? Yeah,
I think particularly with someone like Courtney, she is engaging in a sport at such a level where her output is going to be so high, it's impossible for her to meet her energy demands. So particularly in terms of like the depth of her, even just training and the volume of her training, and things like that, it almost gives her permission to, like, as long as she's covered the kind of the foundational elements of macronutrient consumption, and within that micronutrient consumption, on top of that, it's just about kind of staying alive in terms of her energy consumption. In terms of importance, I think that my answer would be twofold. It's very, very important. Like, in fact, it's essential. Like, the impact that nutrition can have is vast, is massive, and I think that people miscount it, even in the fact that ways that nutrition can impact your sleep and other areas of your performance, like bringing in elements of timing and how that can help you get the most out of each training session. That's why Sean's so good, because he's so on all of that stuff. Then my other side of my answer would also be that my take is that, bringing the human side into that, is that a high performing athlete is a happy athlete. So then, whilst all of these things are so important, it's then about kind of, you have to meet people where they're at. And so being able to almost be like, okay, that's the importance of kind of having the foundation of all of these things. It's also not that deep. because if we treat ourselves as humans first, then we get into human optimization, because we give ourselves the gift of our humanity. We see ourselves as human as opposed to robot. Well, it's not robot optimization, it is human optimization. And so we can optimize Will's performance, and we can optimize Callum's performance as the human beings that they are, as with all the kind of the complex like shit that we all hold, and all of the different parts of our conditioning, our belief systems, our ideas, about the world, the parts of the world that we live in, and all of these kind of stuff. And so it's about taking those kind of ideas and then meeting the person where they're at, and then just kind of building on that. So I would say that it is really important, but then you start with you. You have to meet yourself where you're at. You have to meet yourself where we are, what we like, what we don't like, and then start to just slowly kind of, like I say, expand it from there.
Yeah. Something I noticed that I struggle with, and I guess this is taking it back away from the science side of things, is I really do enjoy eating healthy and well-cooked food and all of that. And I noticed once I've done it for a period, even just like a week, 2 weeks, where I've stepped away from like ultra-processed foods, like I'll feel really good. But then if I have something that is ultra-processed, I almost find it like disgusting. Like it doesn't taste good. It doesn't satisfy me. You don't get that satiety from it.
Yeah, satiated.
So, like, when I'm in that good pattern, like, it's really good, my performance is good. As soon as I've lost it and I've had, like, that one thing and I don't like it, if I carry on down that path, and, like, Christmas being a great example, we've just had Christmas, everyone sort of falls off. It's expected. Like, anyone that's trying to stay sensible over Christmas, good luck. Yeah. That's all I can say.
Completely.
So then, like, coming out of the other side of that, I then really struggle getting back into eating healthy, because, like, once I've had a bit and I've continued, it doesn't feel like the same as it did when I first had it. But I know it's not good for me, and I don't really know how to explain it, but, like, it just feels so good to be eating healthy, but it's such a hard pattern to keep, and I don't really understand why.
Oh, well, first and foremost, I'd say welcome to the dance of being a human being. And second of all, one of the things that I go back to is something that I said earlier, was like food is such a powerful organism in the sense that it stimulates every single sensory system within the body. And with that comes like emotional experiences like dopamine and things like that. And so it comes into that, like, I'm sure we see this patterns in terms of like things like social media usage, and other things that stimulate things like dopamine and that kind of thing. And so I always talk about this idea of like understanding when we reach for that food initially, what is the need that it is meeting? How does the consumption of that food help you? And don't get me wrong, like I've been on the other end of a conversation like this where it's been like, you've just binged 10,000 calories and it served you in some way. It would be like, no, it hasn't served me in any way. It has served you in some way. And it's met a need. And so what we then have to, what I invite people to think about is that idea of like, okay, how's that serving you? And so it might be a case of initially it brought you a sense of comfort, and then it brings that kind of like dopamine release where it's that alleviation of dis-ease that we feel in our body, and distress and discomfort. And then there might be times over Christmas, as an example, where it might meet a need for like freedom And I'll give this is I'm just trying to give examples. It's not necessarily the truth, but one of the things that I really found was, particularly in the context of like binging, and by virtue of that, there's often ultra processed foods which would abandon any health conscious behaviours that I was engaging in. When I was stood at the fridge late at night, it was the one time where I kind of felt free and naked, is the way I describe it, in the sense of like that we spoke at the beginning about being the character and wearing the mask. And for me, looking in the fridge was just that one time where I just went, and I was just free. It was just me and the food, and there was no judgment other than myself, essentially, but don't have to worry about it. And it was just that decompression of my nervous system. So I'm trying so hard to kind of please and to be something or to be someone. And it just was like, So actually then the challenge for me was to actually be more authentic, like to not be performative. And as soon as I started to do that, then the kind of the binging, but by virtue of that, the consumption of like processed foods was far less. And then similarly, in terms of thinking of a client that I worked with fairly recently, who was a first-time mother, and she found herself after she had a history of eating disorder when she was a child, and then had been okay, and then almost like the birth of the child had kind of re-triggered quite disordered patterns of eating. And when we got into it, like there were some things that were kind of unaddressed from childhood, that I will also say, but in again a very reductionist way of looking at it. One of the things that was part of the trigger system was she had this great love for this baby. Her partner had gone back to work and all of this kind of stuff. And so she was left with very little connection. And so having that food, the processed food, particularly in excess amounts, was that one way of guaranteeing joy in her day. And it was that one way of guaranteeing dopamine. And so part of our experience was about kind of balancing that out and saying like, oh, okay, how else can you like obtain a kind of a feeling of connection, but more so joy and something that stimulates dopamine, and kind of take time for you and all of these kind of things. And so that's what I invite people to think about, is that sense of when we're in that, like not to judge it. I'm sure we spoke about this idea of giving ourselves unconditional permission to eat, and that's a kind of a very buzzline statement on social media, but it's true. Like, give yourselves unconditional permission to eat whatever you want, whenever you want. And I know that might sound like, oh, just be out of control and I'll just do X, Y, Z. You won't. Christmas is a prime example. Like, you have 3 days of eating predominantly cheese and crackers, and then by the 27th, 28th, I was like, give me a vegetable, give me structure. Like, your body knows the way, but we just fight that kind of intuitive signals. And so we then, if we can get beyond like the permission side of it, but then we also doing it still, then I'd say, okay, just start to pause and just be like, okay, what are the situations around this? Like, what does this give to me? Like, it's not just, like I say, dopamine, but it could be, it could be a way, like we could get so deep on this kind of subject, because I also had a client who was sexually abused when she was a child. And so she was all constantly trying to lose weight. And this is someone who was someone who chronically binged eat, and she's in a larger body, and so for health reasons needs to would like to lose weight. I don't want to say to anyone what they need to do, and this is the depth of the things that can go on at a subconscious level. And we did some work, and I took her through a process, and then what we found was, like, actually losing weight was a threat, because it made her more vulnerable to the male gaze, made her more vulnerable to, like I say, it made her more desirable in many ways, which she had learned at a very young age that was unsafe. And so you're thinking, why is this woman just kind of piling on food and can't stop eating? And even though she wants to lose weight, this is as Carl Jung, who's one of the most kind of famous psychologists of the 1900s, he says that until you make the subconscious conscious, it will control your life, and we will just call it fate. That we think, oh, these things just happen. It's like, no, these things are buried in our subconscious. And this is what I mean, is the sense of if people are struggling with food, if people are not necessarily, it's not about struggling even, but if people are kind of not necessarily acting in that, like when we come back to the self, we will come back, it feels easy. But like when we resist against that, then there's always a reason why. And so for her, it was this kind of like this, it was literally the development of this outer shell that could keep her safe from trauma that she'd experienced when she was young. And so it can go, like we can talk about it at really superficial levels, which is really important, which anyone can do, which is still valid. But then we can almost, if we're stuck in that cycle, then like I say, there's still always a reason.
Yeah. The last question about nutrition that I wanted to sort of dive into, and this is coming from like a personal curiosity, is to do with gymnastics and the sort of the culture around gymnastics. And I'm sure you've probably heard some of the horror stories that have happened of like coaches restricting food to gymnasts, and it's sort of become this very unhealthy sort of environment. So what I wanted to ask you is, what advice would you give like gymnasts and gymnastics coaches to sort of understand the importance of food and nutrition, and also allowing, like I've heard stories of a gymnast got caught eating like a chocolate bar, and then they were made to run laps of the floor until they burnt all the calories off from the chocolate bar, like things like that. Like, what advice would you give the gymnastics community?
Don't do that. For the starters, I would, again, it comes back to this idea of, I always just say that the key word in relationship with food is relationship. And one of the things that we have to do is particularly with young athletes and children, is allow them to forge their own relationship with food. And part of that is to guide them, is to allow. And the only thing that I can really talk about is like just the removal of shame. Like, food is such an amazing, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's such an amazing organism that it shouldn't have any attachments of shame about that. But we learn that from somewhere. We're not born on this planet thinking, like, the baby just cries when it's fed. And then over time, we learn that actually food has these connotations. Our bodies have connotations. It makes us more desirable. It means we belong more. It gets us more connection. We get these ideas that I am the athlete and all the rest of it, which food can kind of like play into. And so there are things where we have to allow space for kind of curiosity, and allow space for almost like a student-led process. And that doesn't mean that we can't guide. Like, we talk about this idea of being with the child. We don't do anything for the child. We don't do anything to the child. And what often happens is that teachers, parents, coaches, they yo-yo between the two with this. In a kind of a different example, a parent might go, Jimmy, I'll put your shoes on, and it's that they're doing it for the child, and then when the child is in resistance, it's like, for fuck's sake, Jimmy, just put your fucking shoes on, and then they're doing it to the child. And so in that same thing, like if we're trying to guide a child to, like I say, the ideas of developing a solid semblance of nutrition around food, it has to be kind of led, but also if we're with the child, then we can enforce boundaries. We can say, like, if they're going for 2 desserts or whatever, and you feel that that's a bit too much, then you're right to enforce boundaries, but that can be done, like, without shame. That can be the sense of, that can be done in the sense of communicated in the right way and communicated with love. But also allowing space for kind of curiosity, allowing up and opening up conversations to be like, well, what do you want and why do you want it? And then when you are, and bringing in patterns of education and being the sense of like, okay, this is what mummy and daddy want you to eat today, and this is why. And then getting them involved in the decision making and letting them understand how it might improve their performance, particularly in gymnastics, how it might impact their performance in gymnastics. I'd keep it away from body, that's for sure, and things like that, like weight. But it's just about, like I say, promoting as much autonomy, so that, I mean, Simon Sinek talks about this. He has this book called The Infinite Game, where he's taken a concept of game theory, which was designed by James Carse in the 1980s, where he says that most people engage in a lot of practices around playing in a finite game. This kind of idea of a finite game being football, where it's got a clear start, a clear end, and then these clear boundaries, there's clear rules, and then there's a winner and a loser. And then no one plays until the next arranged match. Whereas these other things like the infinite games, and he uses examples within business and how people play business as this kind of finite game, like they throw all their resources, they throw all their ideas into certain kind of projects, times, and it's to the detriment of the company. Whereas the reality is, and then engaging that with health, and it's the same with business. You don't win the game of business. Like, there is no winner, there's no metric, and like I show up to, like, the fitness industry is like $100 billion a year industry, and I show up every day to take a slice of that pie in my own unique little way. But if I stopped playing tomorrow, if I was like, I don't want to play, I don't want to do my job anymore, then that game still exists and you can join and leave at any one time. And so it's that understanding of understanding that, like, our health is an infinite game, but many people treat it like it's finite. Like, this kid has got this one opportunity and they just throw all of their resources, all of their energy and all of their actions to kind of be in this one competition or this one British squad that is going to be called at the end of the year. But what's the implications of that? Like, in the book, Simon Sinek uses the example, and again, of the Vietnamese War, whereas the Americans won I think it's over 80% of the battles, but lost the war. And so how do you win 80 to 90% of all the battles, but lose the war? It's because the Americans were just giving resources, weaponry, men. And the Vietnamese were playing like, how can I show up again tomorrow? how can I show up again tomorrow? So they were always, they engaged with their resources, both their men and their weaponry, in a bid to be like, we'll fight this forever. Whereas the Americans are just as very American in that sense. And it's that same kind of like approach to our health, like 2024, like New Year's resolutions. Like, it's people throw in these, this is the issue that we have with like transformations, like this kind of thing. Nothing wrong with taking action and over your health and wanting to lose weight, and not anti-diet in any respect of that. But like, just look at the sense of, don't play it in a finite process. People throw their money at it, they throw their energy at it, and then they go through this kind of 12-week period, and then they've just got no resources left. Like they haven't got maybe perhaps the financial commitment to commit beyond that to another gym membership, as an example, or they haven't got the energy even, they're just that depleted that to sustain that, and maybe they haven't got the behaviours in process. So what do you need to show up again tomorrow? And the foundation of those are like a generation of autonomy and behaviours. So it's like, we lead the process, we are supported in our process, and then as well as that, we then promote kind of, again, how do you show up again tomorrow? Like, this podcast is a project that takes so much. Like, there'll be days where you'll be like, this is amazing, and there'll be days where it's the hardest thing on the planet. But like, what do you need to do to show up again tomorrow? And part of that might be you just need a rest day. Part of that might be for an athlete, might be to be like, okay, I just need to kind of maybe go for the more convenient option here, or I just want to experiment with this. And just playing around with our behavioural system and exposure. Like, the more we can expose our kids within our controlled environment, means that when they come to leave our environment and go out on their own, then they're much more empowered in that sense.
Yeah, that was an amazing answer. Yeah, just the idea of the infinite game as well. They're just like, got me thinking so much about like how I coach and all of that side of things, but then also about when it comes to nutrition and fitness, and you see all these nutritionists like, lose this much weight in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it might be. They're like, these are the before and after photos, but then it's like they were playing that finite game of, let's get them there. I've got my pictures now, I can mark it and do whatever, and then that client's gone and they don't know what happens afterwards, but a lot of the time they'll go back to their usual weight. Their
ways, yeah. I was thinking about the idea of expansion. I always just think about where am I now and how do I expand? Like almost, I find a resistance, and this is just me personally, with the word growth. Like, a tumour grows. Not all growth is good. And so thinking about expansion is about that expansion of breath. How do I become more free? And so it's noticing, particularly like when we go on our health pursuits, where the friction lies, and understanding the sense of, like, from my own experience, like, one of the things that I'm really grateful to myself for was that I never really tolerated friction, and I was so aware of it. Like, there was this idea of like, I was 125 kilos at my heaviest. And so 30 kilos lighter than that, 25 kilos lighter. And at my lightest was probably another 7 or 8 kilos than what I am now. Then, even at my lightest, I was like, fuck, this doesn't feel right. And so so when we talk about going back to that kind of pursuit of my own kind of development, it has been that sense of like not trying to expand. Instead of being like, okay, I just need to diet and I'm not feeling out of control. I'm feeling out of control a bit here, or I don't feel completely happy with myself, so I need to diet down again. Like, I've never been someone who's kind of tried the same thing. I've been like, okay, well, that's not really serving me, and it's giving me like this idea of so much challenge. And so, like, where else are my options? And that's what and that's taken me to where I am. But then similarly, within where I am now is the most freest space, because that doesn't mean to say that everything's perfect. Like, I'm still human, but it does mean that because of where I am at and what I've been accustomed to falling into in terms of my own personal practice of like therapy that I engage in, my a supervisor that kind of oversees some of my work and all of this kind of stuff. Even if I am in a place of misalignment where I'm not behaving in the way that like I want to, I know there's a reason. And so like being in this space, it's then that sense of like, there's a reason, and then by virtue of that, there's something that I can do about it, even though I don't know what that is, because like I say, some of these things are buried in our subconscious, and so it's a completely freeing thing to be where it's like, no, this is okay. And I think that's part of the, particularly in my early 20s, like it's like, why? I can remember an example this was actually when I was 15, and I was in the shower and I was just having, it sounds almost like quite dramatic, but I had my head against the wall, just being like, feeling shame. And it always sticks with me, this memory, where I was just like, why can't I just do this? Why am I struggling so much? Why am I this? And obviously when I'm a 15-year-old, all I know is the gym. And all I know is my athletic pursuits and all of this kind of stuff. Whereas, now, even if things are not that anything's perfect, but even if I'm in misalignment and I have a period of time where I'm not really showing up as I want to, and it's chronic and there's a theme to it, I'm like, that's cool. Like, I don't need to know why right now. It's just that I know and I can do something about it.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Like, I definitely struggle with that, is being okay with not being aligned.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, like, and not understanding why I'm not aligned. I guess for me, it's like, I've got like my Whoop on, I've got like all these different things that track how I'm doing, like my fitness pal tracking my diet. And it's like I track everything. So then when something's not right, I just want to know why. And I guess that's kind of like, it's the curiosity that drives the podcast. So it's not all negative.
Yeah.
But it's just understanding that I'm not always going to know why. And I think that's difficult for a lot of people, me being one of them.
One of the things that I can relate to is that sometimes the pursuit of the understanding can be to almost like as a compensatory pattern, as in a way that it is, I'm not saying this is true for everyone, certainly not you, but this idea of it gives us the illusion that something is not okay. Like binging is not okay. Like I shouldn't be binging. And that judgment of ourselves is almost a component for control and safety again. Because if we say this is wrong or I shouldn't be acting in this way, then it gives us the idea that we know it's not right. And so therefore we feel like more empowered. That the kind of the generator of pain, one of the things that I had to work through was pain was a great source of urgency for me. Like, I was very good at revising 2 days before the exam, awful revising 2 months before the exam. And so when I felt that sense of like panic or shame, then I would feel that sense of control and that sense of empowerment, and like, I'll do something about it. And like one of the things that I had to look at was like, can I actually trust myself to do these things of value if I don't have any pain attached to them? If I don't shame myself for the way that I look, if I actually just go, you're all right. Like, can I actually trust myself to do these things? But then looking at these ideas of judging these things, they can often be a compensatory fact for a belief that we are unlovable in some ways. And like, that's where people can get stuck, because ultimately, like, that is a lie. And you can't, if someone, and so that's like being in a room with like a VR headset and just fighting, but there's nothing fucking there. All you got to do is just take the headset off and just be like, because like, what is this whole, like, even just when people say like, I am enough and I am all of these things, like, what the fuck is enough? Like, it's this kind of, it's an illusion essentially. Like, we are this kind of either of being worthy or unworthy. It's this thing of just like giving ourselves permission to like exist. And that's what we were. Like a child a child isn't born with this idea of knowing it is enough. My nephew, as an example, when he was 3 years old. He's now 5, and I took him to Christmas shopping in this in the middle of a busy city centre, and I took him to this toy store, and he was just one. I was like, just buy one thing and I'll get you a Christmas present. He comes back with all of these things, and I was like, I'm not telling him that he's only allowed one. And my brother, his dad, told him, okay, well, you can only pick one. And he proceeded to have this big tantrum in the middle of the toy store. And like, yeah, there's kind of child dynamics where he's like pushing boundaries and all this kind of stuff. But also at the core is, like, he believes that he is that worthy that he deserves all those fucking toys. Like, I want more of that energy, you know? And he's like, I don't care what, like, being in the middle of this store, which was packed, by the way, I don't care what any of you think. I'm going to fucking have this meltdown and just say, look, I am that deserving of these toys. And so as part of that is then understanding, okay, well, how do we... at what point did we learn otherwise? And like that's our nature. Like, if you think back to like I say, a baby doesn't question whether it's hungry or not. It just cries. And then over time we become more and more disconnected with, essentially it's the inception of language. We learn these ideas and belief patterns that we can just kind of like pick up, in the way in which we're given love and not given love. And so it's then we then kind of fight against that. And so part of the things that I try and do with my clients is like look at the illusions, because like I say, if we're judging our patterns, it gives us the impression that there's something wrong. But actually where we want to get to is there's actually nothing wrong in the first place. Like, you are binging but you're still lovable, and I know, and by virtue of that, you're probably not going to binge if you feel lovable. But you've got to believe that you can binge and be lovable at the same time. But it's also questioning these ideas of like, there's a right and wrong way to live our life. Like, many of us, like, I've formulated like a sense of understanding of the world, and also within that some form of identity through health and well-being, and which is great. It's added so much to my life. But then it's just a construct of myself. The truth of like a human experience is there's no right way to kind of live my life. And there's this guy on YouTube called Beard Meets Food, great guy.
Yeah.
But he's just a professional binger. Essentially. And then you've got other people who are like, oh, I don't want to be like, for me, like, I've resisted laziness. Like, I don't want to be lazy. But then, like, you've got other people who are just, like, consuming Netflix and stuff all day. I'm not saying that's for me personally, but at the same time, you could argue that they're just consuming, like, they're going to leave this planet consumed way more human art than I will ever. And so it's not wrong. It's same with the sense of, like, gamers and stuff like that. Like, I know there are people that lose themselves on it, but, like, there's no right way. But, like, it's when we are judging something, it's like there's fear there. Whereas, like, if I can look at a gamer and be like, oh no, I don't want to do that, it's because I'm telling myself, like, I fear something within that arena. And there's something about that, as opposed to just having complete acceptance of who that they are in front of me. So this is where, like I say, I kind of come back to where there's judgment, there's opportunity. Like, opportunity to just be like, okay, if where there's judgment, there's fear. And what am I fearful of? Like, I'm fearful of being a lazy person, and then you can go down that rabbit hole and just actually learn to, like, free yourself, because the reality is, and we are everything, and there's a light and a dark side. If I identify it as this idea of strong, there is a light side to strong. Obviously, I have increased function. I can have experiences, I could maybe serve people better and all of this kind of stuff. But there's a dark side to strong. I've lived it. The dark side to strong is I don't honour my body. I don't receive love. I don't do vulnerability. And as the Buddhists say that love and hate exist on the same spectrum, and you essentially get the choice of where you sit on that spectrum each day. You get to choose. How in love are you? And which is true, but the precursor for that is that you have to be completely comfortable with sitting in hate. Like, hate is okay. Like, hate is that sense of I matter. So if I'm okay with the depths of my own anger and the depths of my own hatred, and you're crossing my boundaries here, I get the choice of how I show up. And because I get the choice, I'm going to naturally sit towards love, even if you're being opposing to me right now. And when I say love, love includes me too. So I don't tolerate your shit, but also I don't flip the table and punch you. I just go I'm compassionate towards you, but I also know what's okay and not okay. And it's that sense of, like, okay, if we're love and hateful, it's then strong and weak. Like, we are weak. Like, and by saying I am weak and I am strong, the dark side of weakness is obvious. Like, we can fall into patterns of helplessness and decreased function and some of these things. But the light side of weak is that we're more honouring of our body. Like, I'm willing to just honour my body and be more restful. The light side of weak is I have greater connections because I'm more open, I'm more vulnerable. And, like, you and I don't connect when I'm like, yeah, I made 10 grand this morning and I back squatted 220 kilos. Now, you'd be happy, I'm sure, but, like, because you're a nice person, you'd be happy for me. But it's not something to connect on. The only way where you connect is on our humanity. And it's like, yeah, I'm fucking human too. That's why we breed depth of connection. That's why so many men are kind of walking around feeling lonely, because they're not honouring that humanity. Whereas I try and encompass this idea of we think we have a problem, but we don't really have a problem. It's just that actually what we're doing is we're repressing part of our being, and how do we bring that into the light? Which is a massive tangent, I'm aware, but it's just something that came up when you mentioned it.
No, that was amazing. A lot to think about for myself and for the listeners.
Yeah, it's really quite existential, deep. But yeah, hopefully there'll be something that will kind of just land there.
Yeah. So to sort of bring this more to a close then, having got into, like, half the stuff I planned in my head, as is every podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But, like, we spoke a lot about, like, the nutrition side of things, and then sort of your approach to nutrition, but I know you do more than that. So, like, what's next for you in your? We'll do it like two answers. So, for you professionally and like in your career, but then also in your sort of personal life, because I know you've been like running ultras and you did the Why We Run event, and all of that. So,
Yeah, professionally, just a year of. Hopefully I use the word expansion. I've got projects that are just uncertain, that I'm just trying to bring to the fore. I've got my practice, which will probably just remain quite similar. That, like, I have my influx of clients and clients that will kind of come and go. I expect that to stay the same, and then I've got my kind of Uncommon Bloke kind of men's space where we get men together, and then a couple of other kind of business projects where we'll just see how they evolve. Then personally, I think this is a year where it will be something where I'd like to place more emphasis on me personally. I always think that one of the questions that I ask myself is, what are the things that I want to protect? So it's all very well kind of setting goals, but being able to protect these things is really important. Like, so I'm not kind of just shooting myself in the foot. Again, kind of part of that infinite approach to be like, it's all very well saying I want to go and run another ultra, but then I shoot my relationship in the foot and by pursuing these things. And so it doesn't mean that I can't, but I just have to be aware of kind of like protecting these things. So personally is kind of there's a lot of things that I want to protect, but I'm going to do the UTS event in May, which 55 kilometers over Snowdonia. And then I'll do something towards the back end of the year, which I'm not sure what it'll be. I think I just have spent, this is a year of a bit more like flow, and I've spent a lot of time kind of, as you know, about kind of building up a bit of a base so that like I can go and just kind of like participate and even just to live like you do, just be like, you know what, I'm just going to go and climb X, go and do like, and so this year's more about that kind of more spontaneous expression, whereas like I got into kind of more endurance based activities, kind of coming from a weightlifting anaerobic background with no aerobic base. And so each kind of doing, I don't know if you've ever seen the Rock triathlons, which are amazing. They are like, I did the Welsh one, which is a swim. It's swim in Abersoch of 1.9k. You do a 50 kilometre bike to the bottom of Snowdon, up and down Snowdon, then 50 kilometre bike back, and then a short kind of couple of K on the run on the beach just to kind of finish. But like that kind of like 5-6 hour event, in the beginning was like, that really took it out of me, and I had to train intentionally for it, and then like even allow periods of recovery. Similar, I then went on and did an Ironman, and that was kind of, again, a very structured process. But again, because I didn't necessarily, it's been a kind of a process of developing an aerobic base, then I had to take conscious time to recover after it. And then similarly going into the Why We Run event this year, which to be honest was, it was something that I trained very structured for, but probably didn't have the right to do, if I'm being completely honest. Because again, that idea of I just didn't have the base for it, which in the end showed, because I did the 45, 55, 60k days, the first 3 days, and then I got about 25k into the fourth day, and my ankle just went, my body was just like, no. Which I'm kind of glad about, because like it just shows that you can't just rock up. Not that I did rock up, but like these things that you have to take very, very seriously. But like through that, like, and obviously a 5-day ultra is very like it's a lot. And so this year is about kind of like, okay, well, I've done that. I know what it's like to, like, through that process and through the process of the past couple of years, doing things like the Welsh 3000s and but like with real intention. Now, like a 5-day ultra is pretty up there. And so this year's more about kind of that spontaneous expression. I know that I could just go and do the Welsh 3000s and just do it like on a random Thursday and just, okay, I'll come back to work the next day. And so whilst I couldn't do a 5-day ultra, but maybe I'll go and do a 2-day one now, like one of the 110 Ultra X's or something like that. But part of that is just to, you have to, like the UTS Snowdonia sells out really quickly, so I had to book onto that. But yeah, this year is about, I suppose, living like you do, but spontaneous expression and just kind of continuing to build that aerobic base whilst also just doing what I feel like, and it gives me that kind of sense of flow, because the past few years, like, I earned it. And so to not necessarily push myself as hard in one effort, but just to do, like, in comparison to what I used to do, like more efforts, but just like more frequency of effort, but just slightly lesser, like even just to be able to go for like a 30k walk or run in Snowdonia. It's just, it's the dream, right?
That's the amazing thing about once you've got that base, and this will go for anything, not just fitness, but once you've got that base, it allows that spontaneity of like, I can now just, like on Christmas I did a half marathon.
Wow.
Just I wanted to run a half marathon, so I just went out, did it, because I've got the base that allows me to just rock up and do it without training. And I'm still trying to get that base back. Like everything I'm doing is trying to build the base that I used to have when it was before I broke my ankle. So in 2019, when I was a firefighter, my base was insane. I rocked up, I did an ultra marathon without training. That was a month after doing a strongman competition that I didn't train for.
Yeah.
And it's like I just had such an incredible base. It just allowed that freedom. And I actually spoke about this on one of my first podcasts. We had a free runner on and was talking about how discipline allows freedom. Once you've got the discipline to go into that, he was explaining it like a tree trunk. So once you've got that trunk, then you can expand the branches. Yeah. But without that trunk, the branches are just twigs.
Yeah, 100%. And so, it's pretty new for me. Like, I love that fact that you could just run a half marathon. But even a friend of mine did Grant. You've met Grant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he did the double brutal.
Yeah.
And he asked me to kind of crew him. And so even just to have the idea, I think the day before I did 45k over just on the outskirts of Snowdonia in preparation for Why We Run, and then had like 2 hours sleep, and then like crewed him through the night, basically following him on his bike, and then ran up and down Snowdon, and then did another 30k, just to be like, yes, like this guy, like I can help him. And so that was something that was it's just liberating. And so I hope that I can be more like your expression, where I can just be a sense of like sensibly just kind of honor where I'm at, and just kind of be like, you know what, today I'm just going to go and do the three ranges in Snowdonia, so maybe I'm just going to go and run over the Carnetti. And like when I was training for Why We Run, I just got my my brother to just drop me off in the middle of Snowdonia and ran home, and just stuff like that, which I'd love to like do that, but just not in the event in the lead up to an event like the Goggins challenge. I'd love to do that, and just
the 4
just to give it a go.
I'm planning on doing that this year. So Yeah, if you fancy coming down to South Wales to do it, come join me.
Yeah, well, I'll see how the first kind of bit of 2024 goes. But yeah, it's something. It's just those little things, like you just want to tick them off and play around with different stimuluses, and like that can be a stimulus of something that's more hiking than running. There's a mountain range in Snowdonia called the Carneddau, which once you're up, it's then really kind of like, I want to say it's flat, but there's only one real steep bit up Carneddau Llywelyn, which you really have to scramble and hike. The rest of it you can pretty much run. And so just playing around with different stimuluses like that, and then obviously like the things like the sleep and some multi-day stuff but lower intensity and that kind of stuff. Like what it's in the name, right? Like life's the adventure, and I think that if you can embody that through some of your athletic expression, then for me it's the most enjoyable way to go about it.
Yeah, definitely. So wrapping it up then, what advice would you give 18-year-old you?
I wouldn't give him advice. I would just say it's going to be okay. Because I think that like if he could go into and navigate the world just being like, it's going to be okay. Like, might not be okay now, but it will be okay. Then that's all he needed to know. So just going to be okay.
Cool. And then how can people keep up with you and support your adventures and what you do?
They can follow me on Instagram, which is just my name, at Callum Stronach, and then I've got my website, which has a whole bunch of different offerings and stuff like that. It's funny because one of the things I have toyed with this year is spending 365 days coming off social media. So to build a social media platform to then delete it on the 1st of January next year. I haven't committed to that because it feels like it'd be shooting, from a business point of view, it'd be shooting myself in the foot. I'm inconsistently active. I'm inconsistently active on social media, but I am very accessible if anyone ever wanted to chat on social media. So it'd either be my website or my Instagram for now.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for hosting this podcast.
It's a privilege, and it's good to catch up.
Yeah, as always.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adventure Athletes podcast. If you like this episode, make sure you follow us on Instagram, Spotify and YouTube, and share our content around. It helps more than you can ever imagine. Now, if there's a person in particular that you want to hear from, or a topic that you want us to cover, just drop us a message, let us know in our DMs, and we'll make sure we try and reach out to the relevant people to cover that topic for you. We're always trying to make content that you guys want to listen to. We have just dropped our website. It's adventureathletes.co.uk, and you can go on there to find out the range of different services we offer. So we have sports massage, different training programs, and personal training, both online and in person, that you can sign up to on the website. So make sure you go and check us out at adventureathletes.co.uk.